we go. Good morning. So while it says Bella Albiani, it's actually Dennis Albiani. My daughter was in a speech contest and changed it, and so I haven't changed my Zoom sign-ins since her contest earlier this week.
Good morning, everybody. This is Melissa, and I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, President Bailey. We are ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Very good. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone. Whoops, I just disappeared. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the special board meeting of April 8th, 2021. Let's see, Melissa, would you please do the roll call?
Okay, we'll do a verbal roll call, and we'll start. Director Balin.
Here.
Director Boatwright.
Here.
Director Kearns.
Here.
Director Murphy.
Here.
Director Ringen.
Here.
Okay, wonderful. All directors are present.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. And let's see, now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. And I think the best way to do this is, let's see, I'd like Director Ringen to lead us in the pledge, and we will all say it on mute together. So go ahead, Director Ringen, please.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And again, it'll be nice when we get back in our building for saying the pledge. All right, so our first item is a public forum. And at this time, I would like to welcome the members of the public who have taken the time to attend this meeting and provide comments on matters related to district business. Any member of the public may address the board relating to any matter within the board's jurisdiction. This need not be related to any item on the agenda. However, the board cannot act on an item unless it was noticed on the agenda. Persons wishing to speak during the public comment will be limited to 5 minutes, or depending on the number of persons wishing to speak, it may be reduced to allow all members of the public the opportunity to address the board. So at this time, Corey, is there any member of the public that would like to address the board?
Not that's being indicated, no.
Okay. Well, then we will close the public forum portion of our meeting, and we'll go right into regular business. And Melissa, would you like to read the order of business, please?
Okay, item number 1, legislative advocacy priorities discussion.
Okay, and I think Abby's going to introduce our guests and the topic. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam President and members of the board and any community members who are participating or watching at home. Happy to be here and see everyone's faces on the meeting today. Today we have with us Jordan Smith and Sean Taylor from Van Ness Feldman. They can wave. And we also have Dennis Albiani and Anthony Molina from California Advocate. So they're on the state side, VNS is on the federal side. So the board heard, just going to do a very brief summary. As you can see, the item is, as presented, is legislative advocacy priorities discussion. So really this meeting is for the board's discussion, the board to really drill down on priorities and what the board believes are the district's priorities and how that will fall into what our legislative advocates are focusing on for the district and their action plan coming out of this meeting. So your board heard presentations from both firms back in January, and authorized their contract extensions for a year at the following meeting. So again, today is just to let the board really dive in with them and direct them on what the action plan should be moving forward. So with that, unless there's any questions or discussion, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jordan Smith of VNS, and he will kick off the priorities discussion.
Thanks, Abby. And good morning again, everyone. Again, Jordan Smith with VNF Solutions based in Washington, D.C. We are proud to be your federal advocates back here in Washington. Since we presented to you in January, it's been a busy time here in DC. A new administration has been seated. Lots of folks within various departments are being appointed. And so we're beginning to learn the priorities of the administration, as well as the Congress that is now, while fully led by Democratic control, of the absolute slimmest of margins. So it's an exciting time here. There are a lot of opportunities, and our goal for today is to look at what have been the priorities of TUD and look to you to help us make some judgments on which ones we should be pursuing. So I am going to put up a slide. This is not going to be a slide-heavy discussion, I promise, but I am going to put up one slide that we've worked with along with Dennis and Anthony at the state level, as well as the management team, to really help hone in on what we believe have been the priorities to date, and then from there have a discussion, a more robust discussion about where those should stand. So I hope everyone can see this slide. Please let me know if you cannot.
We can see it.
Great, terrific. And so as we look to outline these priorities, all of which we've done some work on in the past and are beginning to figure out where they should be in the future. Firstly, I want to note they're in alphabetical order, so we don't want to indicate that we have put these in any order of priority or prejudge what we believe your priorities would be. But these are all areas where, at the very least, at the federal level, either some work has been done or there are opportunities that can be done, whether it be looking for funding or looking to further engage Congress and the administration to try to move these objectives forward. So what I'd like to do is maybe just take, at a very high level, go through these and where I believe they stand. In some instances, members of the management team have priority or have the lead on them, and we've just provided background support. And others, we've helped to build some relationships to advance the objectives. And I hope that none of these look foreign to you. I hope that they all look like priorities that have been discussed in the past and that you all have discussed at the board level. So the first one that's here is the new Sonora Water Treatment Facility Consolidation Project. Obviously, it is serving the lower elevations of Tuolumne County, consolidating 3 or more treatment plants and 11 water systems. There has been some work in securing funding to date, and I know that is continuing to advance, and that is one area where we would certainly look to the board for reactions on how we would move forward. And I think I'm just going to tick through all of these and then open it up to the board, unless President Balin, you wanted to do this differently. But I was not going to take a whole lot of time because I don't think these are foreign projects to anyone here. The next up is the PG&E water supply project acquisition. I know that Jesse has been the lead on that, working with Ferp for some time. We've had discussions with Ferp previously, but that largely is something that falls to TUD and the management team to continue to advance forward. On Phoenix Lake restoration, this is something that we've talked about for some time, especially because the county is at a high fire risk. wanting to make sure that the lake storage volume is appropriate. And I mean, we've done some work with sedimentation removal, but ensuring that additional funds that may be necessary to advance that project are available to the extent that that remains a priority. With respect to the FERP 1061 licensing, this is a license that PG&E still owns. I know there have been discussions about TUD engaging over the next couple of years to take that over. Again, this is something that I believe Jesse and the management team have been working directly on, but to the extent that at the federal level we can be providing support, we are happy and willing to do that. Sierra Pines Water Treatment Facility Consolidation Project, again, just as the Sonora Water Treatment Facility Consolidation Project is underway, this is one as well that some work has been done on in recent years. My understanding is that there was a $30 million estimate to complete that project. That's something that to the extent that the board wants to pursue federal funding and opportunities, we are happy to build that into a plan moving forward. Solar power, something where I think this is an example, I think, of where we would have a federal and state nexus with California advocates, Dennis and Anthony. There are projects that are certainly going to be looked at the federal level through infrastructure packages and other opportunities that we can talk about a little bit later. But I know also that there are opportunities through the state to either install solar at administration headquarters or the wastewater treatment facilities. Moving on, in terms of tribal partnerships, I know that there are several projects that would require working closely with the tribes in the region. This is something that our firm in particular has a Native Affairs practice. We have talked through with some of our professionals the extent to which they have worked with tribes and built relationships with tribes as they've looked to embark collectively on these projects. There is a lot of money available at the federal level specifically for tribes. And so we would look to work with you to the extent that you would like to work with the tribes to identify those funding opportunities to see where they could be implemented. And then finally, before we get to the quote unquote others, looking at the work with the Bureau of Reclamation and the new Malones water contract. I know that there has been great progress made there and ensuring that that moves forward. Again, much of that at this point is happening with the management team, but to the extent that that needs to be supplemented by discussions with folks at headquarters at the federal level, we are happy to embark upon that as well. So I walked through these very quickly. Abby, I was not sure if we wanted to give Dennis an opportunity to talk here as well, or if we want to turn it back to the board and walk through sort of the federal pieces first. And President Bailey, maybe if you want to make that judgment, that's great.
Okay, I think it's great if we keep on going and we can see what Dennis has to chime in on at the other level. So I'm for continuing going forward unless the board has some questions right now.
Oh.
I don't see any. Okay.
Well, thank you. So yes, we actually even had an organizing meeting earlier this week with senior staff and BNF and California advocates, and had been talking through these issues and where the directions have been. So we appreciate the engagement and looking forward to the rest of this meeting. What usually typically happens, I'll just talk a little bit more theoretical, is the feds provide both policy direction but also funding direction. And then that can either be directly and there's opportunities to access that money directly for TUD, but that also often will come down to the state. And then the state, through Department of Water Resources, through State Water Resources Control Board, will allocate some of that money through grants, through loan projects or that. So there's two opportunities with there's direct access and then there's grant access through the state of California on even federal funding as well. And then the state has our own priorities and our own ability to typically bond, or there is some allocations to the general fund for resource issues on, fire protection and that. And Anthony has done a significant amount of work. We can talk about it later. I just want to kind of introduce the ideas on there's on fire resiliency, for instance, and there's $1 billion in the proposed budget on that, but it goes from watershed protection to job training to infrastructure. So it's it sounds like a lot, but when you start breaking that out in each area, then there's ways to access that money, and things like one of the ones, solar power infrastructure. There's money in different pots that help primarily buy down the front end cost of something like a new solar engagement. So as those priorities are identified, then we can go and look for opportunities for funding through state areas and get that. And then the second part is we can also help engage in future bonds, which there's likely to be one next year, and it's being currently constructed right now, where we could say, hey, this is a priority that could actually fall under this pot. And while it won't say TUD access this, we can help shape the pot size as well as the parameters of it to increase the opportunities for funding in the future. So that's really where we see that. Again, Jordan did an outstanding job going through each one. There is significant opportunities over the next couple of years, both with federal and state funding, and we just need to identify the priorities. And I do think we talked about this earlier. There needs to be both a timeline analysis of that, which we can help do. So it might be a priority, but it's a 3-year opportunity, where other ones may be very short. Okay, yeah, we can. There's a project on the books. We can go try to find opportunities at this point. So besides having a priority of which is the highest priority, there's also some time frames that we should discuss later in the meeting, and expectation establishment in those areas. So that's what we look forward to participating in, and can add some information as to where there may be opportunities as you all think about this list, as well as what, there's new members to the board, as well as new concepts and priorities if that's where we want to take it. So look forward to the conversation and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dennis. Anthony, is there anything you would like to add?
Nothing. I will not belabor this. We can move forward with having a discussion with the board. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Yes, well, I'm eager to open it up to the board for discussion, and maybe I'll just kick this off with the fact that what I'm interested in is this current administration's let me see, philosophy. And where I'm going with this is, each administration has their own way of wanting to get things done. And so what I'm interested in basically is to really connect with the fact that TUD is within a watershed, and we have funding opportunities through various integrated resource management projects. So I'm looking at, over time, water purveyors beginning to extend their identity into more of a triple bottom line approach. So projects need to be good for the economy and good socially and good for the environment. And if it doesn't cover those three, then it really isn't considered sustainable. So my question to you guys is, with the Fed's driving policy direction, and thinking, in terms of TUD, responding with more of an interdisciplinary approach to grants, grants that have a good tribal component, have a good social component, have some environmental restoration, provide cleaner water, clean up, septics in our drinking water, et cetera. Seems like projects that have multiple benefits are driving some of the grant qualifications. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, this is Sean. I think, Jordan, you're still muted, so I'm going to go ahead and take this for a second, if that's okay. Can everybody hear me okay? I haven't spoken yet, so I just want to make sure. Excellent. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So the Biden administration, obviously, Democratic administration coming in with a lot of close ties to social issues. Equity across the board is going to be a big issue moving forward for them. So disadvantaged communities, rural communities are going to be priorities. Those are also priorities of a lot of members of Congress already, but there's definitely an eye for it, more so in this administration, and also with both senators from California as well, and quite a few in the delegation. I think what we're going to see is, climate initiatives are going to be a part of just about every, or at least part of that discussion in every grant opportunity that you have. And grant opportunities, run the gamut across the board, right? It could be community development projects. It could be through USDA, which you all already have engaged on a few of those projects, as well as working with Interior and the US EPA. And if there's, I think what we're going to see, and we're starting to see a bit of it first, is that the administration's just brand spanking new. They haven't been on board very long yet. They're still working within their first 100 days. So we expect them to work with Congress on drafting legislation over the next couple of months to move on a lot of these climate initiatives. They released their plan just a couple of weeks ago. It's very 30,000 foot level. Here are the top numbers we'd like to see spent on programs. Not a lot of definitive definitions and direction on how they'd like to see that run. I think they're going to be leading on members of Congress to lead that. So what we've heard over the last week is that they're working with leadership in both the House and Senate to draft legislation. Many of those bills we've already seen: Clean Futures Act, or Future Act. I always want to say Futures Act. Clean Future Act, the LIFT Act, bills that were introduced in the last Congress, transportation bills, water bills, and whatnot. We're going to see a lot of those with a lot of sensitivity to cleanups. So any cleanup efforts, PFAS, emerging contaminants, things like that, as well as climate initiatives, initiatives that are going to be beneficial, like you had mentioned earlier, President Balin, on social issues, environmental issues, and of course, what's the economic return to the community. So, and I apologize for the background. The air conditioning is a little loud, so I'll mute myself now. If anyone has any questions, I'll open it up.
The only thing I was going to add to that is, there are a couple of different places that we would be looking for funding opportunities. One would be the type of bill or packages that Sean just laid out, which is a jobs bill, a stimulus bill, which would include infrastructure with a focus on environmental considerations and climate. Then you've just got the general appropriations process. So the president's budget, or the preliminary budget, is going to be coming out tomorrow. Shortly thereafter, we will see the full FY22 budget. The design of the budget will give us a sense of the administration's priorities, where they believe money should be spent, at which point it will go to Congress for appropriating those dollars and having that debate. But I think we can say with a fair amount of confidence that this administration's budget and this Congress will be appropriating more dollars for programs that will benefit local communities, municipalities. We've already seen that in the last stimulus bill, opportunities. That the actual formulas are a little unclear, but those are all opportunities for us to be looking for money to bring back to local communities like yours. The third bucket would be authorizing bills. So things such as the Water Resources Development Act, which is very specific about authorizing projects, largely core projects. But that's where, once you get a specific project or program in an authorizing bill, we have the ability to then go back and much more easily ask for funding. And then the fourth, President Balin, as you suggested, is just grants, just looking at grant opportunities throughout the federal government. Some will apply specifically to tribal communities, others may have low-income components, but each is an opportunity for us to engage. But what we need to do is figure out, among the list I had up a moment ago, what those priorities actually are. It's very tough to go after 12 different things at once. So, and as Dennis alluded to, tiering them in a way that's not only of greatest importance to TUD, but sort of what the timetable looks like. Is there a need this year? Is it something that's a 2 to 3 year need? And then that's how, in my mind, we would design a work plan. Once we have sort of all those components, we know the priorities, we know the opportunities, we know the time need, and then we build a plan out from there.
Okay, thank you. Any other board comments on that one? Because I have some more comments, but I don't want to dominate the show here. Everybody okay so far?
Jeff has his hand up, or had his hand
Yeah,
up.
sorry, I was on mute too. Barbara, I just had one question. You mentioned the triple bottom line, and I was making a note here. Social, environmental, and what was the third?
Economic.
Economic. Okay. Okay, that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Good. It seems to me, in your guys' experience, are the organizations retooling, if you will, or restructuring so that they are able to field this money coming in? In other words, one of the problems I see for small communities and disadvantaged communities is, and here's an example. In the old days, when we logged 100, maybe 100 million board feet a year in the 80s and 90s. Those timber receipts came back to our county, and 50% were spent on roads and 50% were spent on schools. Then the Rural School Self-Determination Act came in, the logging went away, and we got a bunch of money coming in to the county, but folks had to compete for that money. And the competition takes time, and we're also competing against each other. And it puts the burden of trying to find grants and trying to write grants and trying to chase money on small disadvantaged environments like our rural counties. So what my question is, in you guys' experience on the federal and state level, are you seeing smaller entities banding or forming larger integrated teams, let's say TUD, and working with our counterparts at the supervisors level so that we can work together and get grants on a scale that really help the whole community's economic, social, and environmental well-being, because it's getting harder and harder to just compete against each other and separate it out and go after one little project here, and it might be at the expense of a whole bunch of other stuff. And fire is sort of the big leveler here. So my question to you guys is, are you seeing smaller disadvantaged communities like Tuolumne County really working together across boundaries and silos as a team to go after some of the funding?
I'd be glad to discuss that on a couple levels. Way back when I worked in the Senate for it was actually at that time State Senator Jim Costa, but we developed a concept called Integrated Regional Water Management Plans, IRWMs. And that concept was exactly what you're explaining, Director Balin. And that was, the water district does one thing, the sanitation district does another thing. The flood control people want to get water through the community as fast as possible so it doesn't flood, while the water storage people want to stop the water and store it for future generations. And then there might be stormwater rules, and different entities are struggling with all that. But and they have a very specific task. So the concept was to get all those folks to work together to put regional priorities together and say, hey, we could do something for flood control that also might do groundwater recharge for water supply, and we also may be able to do some changes to our sanitation districts that then result in better water quality. So how can we do all those three things and under one grant? So that was really the genesis of those. Now they're still around. That I'm aware that TUD participates in those programs, but that's the theory behind that. And then when you talked about the sustainability, the triple bottom line, the sustainability triangle, and all those things, I think that over the last, I would say, decade, the legislature has legislated moving in that direction, and we have laws that engage more disadvantaged communities, and not only the community itself, but even the participants, the environmental justice groups, and really go with the holistic process to get full engagement of the community. I think so. In an earlier conversation, we had discussed this, and Tuolumne County, and I would say even now I'm going into a little bit of history with you all, but TUD is a little bit of that, where it was formulated when you had disparate communities that had their own water systems. How do we consolidate them so that they can work together, over time? So my understanding is they did that, many years ago, and then have continued to consolidate and go. And so we do see pressure and opportunities to promote consolidation in the California as well, among water entities, as well as maybe a water and a sanitation district that. And you guys have gone through that, as well as the growing pains that sometimes a consolidation can do, where you have to start bringing in other communities, and then it changes the political dynamics and all that. So that is a priority. We see it in the state of California, and we see sustainability being ingrained into that. And your staff did an excellent job. They created we had talked about disadvantaged communities, because a lot of the grants require that, but maybe the entire community isn't fully disadvantaged. So they put together a very good schematic and identified where they are severely disadvantaged, and then not so much. And then what I could see us doing in the future, and that's what we started the conversation on, is laying that over your projects. And then as we do grant applications, or we go advocate as well, we could say, okay, this project serves 80% of this project is serving this disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged community. Boom, we move up the priorities list and could get extra points for that. And again, you have outstanding staff that understand that. So I think I welcome their input as well. But we've started to do that, where it's an excellent schematic, and we can use that data to then bolster your arguments for holistic community participation, as well as benefit from these types of projects. So I would welcome you to ask that through the staff, as you start to make priorities, which ones would serve communities of need, and that is highest as well.
Great. I think an example, I think it's this integrated thinking, and we do have a IRWM. I know that some of them are going away. They take an enormous amount of work, and of course, as any collaborative process, all these projects are listed, and then they're all evaluated collectively. And so I see kind of the parallel where the talent that TUD is able to go after funding without, forming their own collaboratives, let's say, in addition to the IRWM, because there's only so much money through the IRWM mechanism, but that collaborative is really, really good. One example where I think a real integrated approach, if we could really understand that concept, because TUD, we get our needs met in terms of tightening up our system or getting cleaner water out of it. And then the community benefits because there's an environmental component. I'm thinking of Phoenix Lake restoration, where there's a public access component, environmental component, and that actually contributes to the health of the watershed in general and the property values in the area. So everybody is supporting each other in this. The trick is to find the money where all those benefits are funded, and that seems to be tricky in the past.
And I would argue, President Balin, under this new administration, we will see grant opportunities that will look to combine all those priorities. I think that is just a fundamental way that this administration is going to work. And so to the extent that there are multi-benefits across a community, I think that they will actually be, the opportunity will be drafted in such a way that you'll have to demonstrate that you can provide all those benefits with those funds.
Yeah, this is Sean. I'll just add to what Jordan's point is that each administration gets a chance to come through and change the guidance on these grant programs, and exactly what Jordan's saying. This administration is very focused on the issues you've just mentioned, and they will be whether there's going to be new programs, programs through an infrastructure package that may tweak programs to allow for more regional benefits, things like that. We're going to see a lot of that, not just coming legislatively, but also through the guidance that the administration has on when they review and ultimately provide grants and grant opportunities.
We did have a comment from Director Murphy. She had her hand up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And fabulous conversation. I just wanted to follow up on what I thought was part of Barb's, Director Balin's question, which was, is there, like on things like fire and solar, is there a benefit? And I understand that you guys are representing TUD, but is there a benefit for looking kind of at the county level for things like that? So teaming up with emergency services and Board of Supervisors in the city on issues that would, for fire resiliency, or with the solar, where we're looking at a more community, like if we're looking, if the numbers work out better for the county as disadvantaged than they do for, the water district or something like that, would there be a benefit for looking at the county level and cooperating with other entities within our county to try to go out after combined money that might be regional of benefit across the county?
Absolutely. One word answer, absolutely. And because as President Balin said a moment ago, what you don't want to do is suddenly have TUD competing against the county for the same bucket of funds and having two applications in where you might be able to demonstrate a greater need for the community as a whole. And that doesn't just go for funding opportunities. I think that goes for policy priorities, to the extent that we are relaying those back in Washington to folks in Congress, in your delegation, and with the administration.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm glad that you mentioned policy priorities, because it seems to me this is kind of a two-way dance, and so TUD is in some transitions right now. And, it's important that we look at the new leadership that's coming in, where their mindset is. Do they have do they understand the importance of looking at projects that are, let's say, county-wide benefit, and that we're all in this together kind of thinking, and integrated resource management where water benefits, but then so does the community because they're benefiting. And one thing leads to another, they're more likely to support some of the efforts that we're making because it's demonstrable. The community-wide benefit is demonstrable. It's beyond just, maybe patching roads and, fixing some pipes. This is really being able to increase our self-reliance on our system, which then feeds into long-term goals for community prosperity. So I think the integrated approach, if we can understand what's driving the policy priorities, then we can kind of gear up or retool as a whole community so that our priorities in our sustainable plans, some people call them strategic plans, but we have sort of that integrated thinking so that when the grants are there, we have identified those gaps because we know where our future, what we want to be, our vision for the future. And so that we're going after that money because it's consistent with our integrated thinking as well. So if we're still real compartmentalized and all the money wants tribal involvement, environmental, economic demonstrations, greenhouse gas reduction, I don't know, who knows? It seems like the more our thinking is prepared for that, and our goals are in alignment with that, then when we apply for the money, we can point to our goals that it's all consistent.
Right.
If
I can just add, there's one intermediate step in there that I think is really critical, which is once you've identified those priorities and you feel like whether they're TUD or the community at large, and you've really figured out what those policy goals are, build, at least at the federal level, telling that story with members of Congress, with Senator Feinstein, Senator Badia's office, their staff, with Mr. McClintock's office, making sure that they understand what the need is, what you're looking to accomplish, so that when you're going after some of these funds, you're a known entity and they want to help you. So it is so important that we look to be strategic about building those relationships in Congress, building the relationships with the agencies, which I know many on the management team have done through some of these various projects. Some people are still in the same seats they were a year ago because they're career folks. There are a lot of folks that are going to be new or that are new. And so making sure that story is told effectively so that when the ask for the money comes, people know they have context for it and they know the reason and the actual need. And that is just a critical part that we would look to build into the strategy. On the federal level, I'm sure Dennis and Anthony do the same at the state level.
Yeah, this is Sean, and I hate to be the guy that keeps adding. I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background on appropriations process and what members are thinking, as well as what we've just discussed with the administration. Senator Feinstein's been around a very long time, and I've watched and worked with her folks on appropriations requests. And now that we're back into no longer calling them earmarks, but community project funding opportunities, she hasn't changed any of the messaging from a decade ago when we were working with her office, and she would say, if you could bring me a project that has regional support, multi-jurisdictional benefits, and a focus on the future, right? What's the long-term planning of whether it's a county, the communities within the county, and or even regional beyond that, like we're talking about an entire section of a state or whatnot. Those are the things they're really looking for. So ultimately, when you put a request into the members, they just want to make sure that you have that you've got regional support, right? Well, we've talked to the counties, we've talked to other communities in the area. We've also talked to other entities like tribal entities, and they're on board. They have benefit here. We could also, you've got fire suppression opportunities by upgrading facilities, things like that. Always come across as a very, a high priority item to members when they see that. There's been a lot of thought put into it. Like you said, a lot of layers to a project, a lot of benefit.
Can you restate those three things? Bring me a project with regional support.
Yeah. Regional projects with multi-jurisdictional benefits is really sort of the phrase of the future. I say the future now, but it's kind of been around a bit. But that's a key piece, and just being able to explain those when you submit, for instance, a request for a grant or a federal funding opportunity through a member of Congress's office, you want to be very explicit about what support you have in the region, which also includes like board letters, commission letters, things like that of support. Local community entities, stakeholders is key as well. So you would want to find someone from the environmental community. Maybe you talk about recreation aspects, air quality concerns, folks that are watching those. California, I'm from Florida. Those two states, our two states, are very similar in the way they approach projects like this. There's got to be multi-jurisdictional benefits to it, and that's what they really want to see. Hope that helps.
And so that would be multi-jurisdictional with multiple benefits.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to just upgrade a facility if you can also cut down on air quality issues, or actually not cut down, but improve air quality issues. If you can make anything more efficient, right? Whether it's access to a facility for recreation opportunities, if you can greenscape things, there's all types of different aspects to these things that are important. I think more importantly, and those are all very important, but having the regional buy-in, right? And that's where I think the conversation comes in to say, well, as a tribal entity, what are my benefits? Okay, so it might be fire suppression opportunities for a certain project, or it might be recreation and protection of fishing rights and water rights and aspects, things like that from their point of view. There's a lot of cultural aspects, and you do have tribes within your community, so that's an important piece to always think about when we're building out these projects and priorities.
I think this is a really good discussion because we have two sovereign nations in our county, two federally recognized tribes. The lower one, the Chicken Ranch, is interested in the CVP water, okay, for their needs. They have some agricultural needs, et cetera. I think a lot of what you're saying, Sean, Jordan, and all of you guys, is that if we can open up our thinking to these benefits so that, for an example, if Chicken Ranch is receiving CVP water, that is then offsetting water that doesn't need to be, that can stay in our upper basin, let's say, and benefit that tribe, or that releases that demand for that water and augments the water so that there's indirect benefit from the Chicken Ranch pumping up the CVP water as a cooperator on that one, and yet that actually puts more water into the system for a variety of natural and cultural and municipal benefits. And I guess opening up our thinking for me, fire protection is the great leveler, because if we don't solve that one, our tourism, our housing, our beauty, our ability to be a wonderful place as a destination as well as a place to live just goes up literally in smoke. And so what is frustrating for me is so often I see money for projects that are like storage or tightening up the system for water conservation. Well, up here, that just means the water leaves our county faster. You know, we can't impound it. We're really shy on space, and those are mega projects like raising line and stem. And so a lot of the water conservation means for us, we don't get to utilize the water that we conserve. It goes definitely down to downstream beneficiaries. And so to me, some of the monies I would be looking for really are tied into our unique situation where we really need lots of water essentially on standby to help for fire suppression in our area, because we've got national forest land, you know, to our east, but then we're all in the wildland urban interface. And so with our needs assessment around the corner, it sounds like this current administration is more sympathetic to us identifying water resources and their need essentially to be parked in our county in case of catastrophic fire, things like that, and to help provide grant money to build our fire suppression infrastructure. And when I say that, I'm not always meaning treated water. I want to protect our natural agricultural water resources. And in addition to that, and sometimes these grants and whatnot are written by richer coastal communities, and we can't really make them fit into our neighborhood unless they have that multiple benefit and multiple jurisdiction benefit. I'm just rambling, but I think I'm understanding.
I see the member Rigdon has a question. He's got his hand up, I think.
Okay. Yes, Ron.
Hey, I just wanted to tag on to what you were saying, because I think you're going down a really good avenue there. Tuolumne County has an undesirable notoriety of being the most fire-prone county in California, and it's really kind of scary, because it's exactly what Director Balin was saying. Is if we have a fire in that South Fork Stanislaus River Canyon, which is not burnt in over 100 years, and also has the 3-mile-long wood flume, which is our almost complete source of water, or major portion, I think 95%, we might as well just pack up and leave, because there'll be nothing here. All the tourists and recreation, everything will be gone. There'll be no reason to come to Tuolumne County, and there'll be no jobs or even any water that will be clean and good. So one of the things that a couple of us have kicked around for years, and we never seem to be able to quite get there. If we have a fire, no matter how big it is or how small it is, the thing that we need to do, in my humble opinion, we have storage, we have water storage, but after the fire, that's what we're going to need for everybody to drink and bathe and cook with. So you don't want the firefighters using water out of the fire hydrants. So we have this ditch system that runs throughout the county, 70 miles of it. And if we could put some firewater drafting points along the ditch that automatically filled, and we were able to get the fire departments to understand that they don't go to the fire hydrant, they go to the firewater drafting points, we would be protecting that water in the tanks for human use after the fire and during. So at any rate, that was just something I wanted to throw out there, because if you folks, as you work on these various projects, looking for money or whatever as you're doing your job for us, if you had that in the back of your mind that that's something we really need to get accomplished, that would be great.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
And Jordan, you may know this, but I'll just say it for edification. TUD is mandated, as is Twain-Hart Community Services District, and all water purveyors are mandated by law to provide water for fire protection. Doesn't mean we're in the firefighting business. It just means we are obligated to provide water. And so that's where Director Ringen is saying, could this current administration be sympathetic, if you will, in their policy so that we can really get grant money to integrate a way to provide the community, whether they're a customer or not, fire flow without adding the cost to post-fire recovery costs, which is if we only used fire hydrant water, which is treated water, which has to be, fully pressurized, that adds to the cost of us trying to recover, because then people are boiling ditch water. Whereas if we just used, raw water, and we were able to get grants to identify these areas and utilize our raw water as a bona fide use for fire protection, since we have to deliver it anyway, again, to everybody, whether you're a TUD customer or not. That's, I think, part of Ron's questions is, are there grants that can actually help us so that we don't just bleed down our tanks fighting fire? That we can actually have a plan and get grant money to fund that plan and that direction.
Sure. I want to do a little digging into either existing regulatory proposals or legislation that's out there to see if it speaks to this, and then certainly along with that, dig into whether there are grants that would speak specifically to that. So that's a takeaway for us for sure.
Yes, Ron. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. I don't know whether this is of any help or not, but I've been involved with the Tuolumne Stanislaus Integrated Water Management Group for many years, and they just recently, we just recently put together and got a very large grant for Twain-Hart Community Services District, and they are doing one of those projects that you folks were just talking about that actually is stormwater control and direction, and it's going to be used to recharge groundwater, as well as an education component where schools in the community can go to a certain area and actually see how water can be used in a constructed, good way, salvaged, let's call it that. And it even then, when it flows out finally, that's the water that goes to our reservoir ultimately, the Phoenix Lake reservoir. So, I mean, it was a multifaceted project that's underway right now, and you may want to check into that because it's really quite, it's really something to be proud of. I mean, those folks up there really put together a great program. The other thing is that they also have a firewater drafting point from one of their reservoirs, and they set it up so that fire trucks can pull up. It's a dry hydrant, so it's, like I said, it's in the reservoir that they have there, And they can fill multiple trucks in just a few seconds with a pump that they have that gets connected to that. So that can be hugely important in the time of a fire, because you're going to be able to get those trucks right back there and get them on the job of putting out the fire. And they're using raw water. They're not going to use the treated water. And the third thing that I want to bring up is the city of Sonora. This is another program that I've been involved in for several years. Has what they call their EAP program. Please don't make me try and tell you what that acronym is. But basically, it's about saving electricity, and which also would be saving water, because water and electricity are hand in hand. So you might want to check with the city of Sonora, and they would be a good partner, possibly along with the county, on some of these projects and grants that you folks may be searching out. So that's it.
I have a question or comment, and maybe it's just a separate project that could be added to the list under others. Mr. Ringen had mentioned the resilience of the wooden flume that we have that leads from Lyons through our main canal. Very expensive project, but a tunneling and piping system from Lyons down below the fire zone, if you would, to change that up would certainly be a multi-regional asset for TUD in the community.
Yeah, and this is Sean. Just real quick, I think those are the types of projects that when we're talking with members and fire suppression, obviously given the climate change issues and the just weather patterns in general getting worse in places like California, and just in the West in general, we're going to see legislation reintroduced this Congress. It's already beginning to happen. We've seen some bills move in the previous Congress, but I think what members are looking for is, how can communities best benefit, right? And this is a project that would certainly do that right off the bat. I mean, making the argument that you haven't had a fire, in the valley in over 100 years is a grave concern, I think. I haven't been there. We can't wait to get out there to see it ourselves, right? It's easier for us to tell a story when we're on the ground, but that's one of those projects that that multi-jurisdictional benefit to multiple communities, the region as a whole. If you can get folks like the county on board, I totally, those are the kinds of projects members get behind quickly. And what we can do, and as we've mentioned earlier, is work on the policy provisions of any legislation that would expand programs and opportunities, because I think we're going to see pockets of money either that would be cut out in existing programs across the federal nexus, and or new programs specific to this through USDA, DOI, Department of Interior, other federal entities, where we can address these issues so that we can be preventive and work on resiliency in advance of the next season's fires, which are likely just around the corner. So knock on wood there. I didn't mean to bring that up. Sorry.
And not just one other point, not that this is good news, but it's not just California that has been dealing with fire issues the last couple of years. It's throughout the West. But what that does mean is you have people on both sides of the congressional aisle who have interest in advancing federal wildfire legislation, and we have bipartisan support. There is a better chance that will get across the finish line and be able to benefit communities.
Director Murphy has her hand up for a comment.
I just more of a clarification from David Boatwright. Would you mind to expand a little bit, just for my edification, on your thoughts on what's needed for that project?
Well, it's not a new concept. It's actually been around TUD for a while. It's just one of these projects that's always seemed out of reach because of the amount of funding needed to actually do it. But it would actually replace, Mr. Perkins could probably chime in, I think flume A, B, and C, if I'm not mistaken, and actually put in a tunneling and piping system so that the main canal is always protected coming down from lines. It not only protects the flume from fire season, but also a stormy winter events that can wash out, or trees being blown down across that same wooden flume. The flume has a tendency, once it's broken, the water that is flowing down cannot instantaneously being stopped. It can wash a huge section of itself away. And then you have to start back with, what do you attach a new flume to, because the foundation is gone. So it does cover quite a bit, but like I said, Mr. Johnson or Mr. Perkins can add more details to that, but it just hardens the infrastructure from lines throughout the main canal.
Yeah, David, thank you. Yeah, we could go into a much greater detail, but you hit the nail on the head as far as the vulnerability. So you did a great job there. Thank you.
So, this is probably too soon to get into it, but I do want to raise programs that might be beneficial to use at the federal level here. And one that we came up with a bit of a matrix looking over all of your projects, but specifically when it comes to this, we've represented communities in the past that have had the same concern, some with, let's just say, outdated pipes. So their pipes were like 2-inch pipes that were put in post-World War II, right? Community has grown out and they haven't had the access to be able to go in there, or the funding ability really to go in and get to even like a 4 or 5-inch pipe, which would at least get them to pressurized system where they could suppress fires, right? So we worked with them in the past to be able to get state and tribal assistance grants. Those programs are allocated through the US EPA, but they can also be authorized through a state and a tribal assistance program directly through members of Congress, right? Now that we have this funding opportunity in the yearly budget process. So this is one of those sorts of projects where you say it's a high priority. If you can get to the point where, and it can be used for, I believe, planning, design, and construction. But once you get an authorization for something like that, and or get a grant funding going, if you can get the member of Congress to get behind it, you can, you get, I think the cost share is actually one of the more beneficial grant opportunities, because it's only a 20% cost share. Now, I will say this, not every grant's the same, right? So a lot of across the board in the federal side of things, if you go back 10 or 20 years, in a lot of cases, they had been looking to change and or flip the allocations from mostly federal to mostly local. But we could provide a 20 to 45% match. This is one of those programs where it's still a very high federal match. So that's something to think about. Doesn't always work for everyone, but it's a program that we don't even necessarily need to, we would, I think it's an easy sell, I guess is the easiest way to say it, is that when you talk about the next season's fire issues and concerns, I think you've got a great argument here to say, okay, this is something that maybe a member could get behind right now because of the immediate benefit. One of the things that members are always going to look at when it comes to projects, though, and I'm just going to throw this out here, I don't want to talk too much, is that what's the long-term job creation? Well, that's not necessarily something that we should always be super concerned about, because obviously job creation and building any project is going to take place over the course of the construction for the most part. But afterwards, it's more about public safety and the benefits to the community as a whole. And that's going to be really the big selling piece there. So I just wanted to warn you, might hear about, well, how many jobs, long-term jobs does it create? What's the economic benefit? Well, the economic benefit in this case is that the community exists beyond any fire, right? That's the big thing. So let's just make sure that the community as a whole is healthy moving forward, and they're, ready to take it on, but more resilient than you were before.
Sean, you mentioned greenscaping a while ago, probably about 15 minutes ago. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the aspects, and we've heard some of these discussions before, from the board is that, if you have recreation opportunities at any of your facilities, it's always an added benefit to the community, especially a community that's a disadvantaged community. So if you can put those facilities more often than not around disadvantaged communities, there's going to be benefit there, because there's a huge push in Congress in general, but within this administration most definitely, to take advantage of opportunities they see that can be done, in the next 3.5 years, right? What can we do to address the long-term benefits of disadvantaged communities, and the fact that they haven't had parks, and they haven't had, they may have drinking water aspect issues and things like that. Again, I don't know, not everybody, the TUD doesn't necessarily provide everything to everybody in the community, but anytime there is an aspect of a project that has additional benefit, that's a big piece. So I can give you an example of, you talk about, let me just, hold on, I've lost the word here. Groundwater replenishment, for instance, right? So if you have groundwater replenishment facilities, let's just say, everybody does it differently. Some pump straight into the ground, and it depends where your community is. I'll give you an example. In the San Fernando Valley in Southern California, they have these huge groundwater pooling places where the water comes down off the mountains from the Army Corps of Engineers facilities and a couple other facilities, and then it just slowly penetrates into the ground, right? Some places are different than others, but that's a great opportunity. That one not in particular, but it's just, I'm giving you an example, a great opportunity of creating a system where waterfowl can come, and then people can come and watch birds and things like that. There's a lot of natural aspects to those places. And if there's any benefit to an endangered species, for instance, that's huge. So those are the sorts of things we'd be looking at if you had a groundwater replenishment facility where it was a pond that was being filled, and then you create new marshes, things like that. Just a lot of, and they don't have to be big pieces. We worked with some folks in Southern California to clean up groundwater runoff from roadways and built natural facilities, basically different tiered facilities as it ran through the system to clean the water up. And it attracted a ton of environmental support, right? So that's a great piece there, as well as educational centers for children to come and view ducks and whatnot, great habitat and things like that. So by the time the water made it out to the ocean, it was much cleaner. The bay was cleaned up. That lots of opportunities like that. So things to think about as you're designing your projects.
Thank you. That's something that we have in this county, whether we like it or not. We have a naturalized waterway throughout our county, and that the miners built us, that are now species dependent wetlands. These are cultural landscapes that have been evaluated and determined eligible to the National Register of Historic Places. And so it gets complicated when we look at dewatering these water dependent environments that form linkages and climate differentials throughout our whole county. And I'm interested in integrating those as climate mitigation opportunities, wildlife corridors, alternative non-motorized forms of recreation, dispersed recreation, which we know in the time of Corona is pretty important rather than congregating types of recreation. So it's complicated when we decide to pipe something for, and then we actually dry a whole area out. And when I think of Phoenix, the Phoenix has been identified by Fish and Wildlife of having some incredible wildlife wetlands that they have determined are of benefit to all of California. They have great significance. And so they're linked, that's only one area. They're all linked by our whole waterway system. But the fact is that we have to protect them and dredge and provide. So we have to provide for better water quality, colder water, less algae bloom and smell, and provide recreational component. We've dredged, we've done some of those, but for some of the wildlife, greenbelt, fire protection components, do you see the new policy priorities as having funding opportunities so that we can get some of those other social and environmental aspects of the Phoenix restoration completed? Do you see money out there for what we'd like to do next out there?
Well, at this point, there's a lot of discussion. Yes, I think there is going to be an opportunity. Each individual, again, just to kind of go back on the guidance for different programs, the guidance that this Biden administration is going to put forth on grant opportunities and how that money is allocated, there'll be prerequisites within, the purview of those reviewing the grants with priorities like this. Absolutely, yes. I would need to know a little bit, I guess, more about the wildlife aspect of things to be able to tell you, what explicitly we could go after. But I think there's definitely going to be opportunity, and I think we're going to see some more growth through the legislative process as well in some of these programs, because that's really the big push here, is a lot of social and environmental aspects.
We also had Director
case,
Ringen and Director Murphy with their hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. First Ron, then Lisa.
Okay, I just wanted to give you folks a little background on that pipe situation that Director Boatwright brought up. A few years back, right after the rim fire, the county entered into the resiliency competition, which I'm sure you folks are well familiar with. And TUD at that time looked at that as a dual pipe running down in the canyon and connecting up to the ditch system at Twain Hart at the spot up there by Sierra Pines, where we're going to be building the new water treatment plant. At any rate, it got shot down because the flume, which is what we were concerned about, was owned by PG&E. Now, of course, this is going to be changed if we can finally get the PG&E acquisition done, but that's still a few years away, maybe. And so I just wanted to point out that that's what happened, was because the flume is owned by a for-profit corporation that knocked us out. But it was looked at by TUD staff, and there was even a dollar amount put to it at that time for an ask to be in that resiliency grant. And it was kind of interesting, because right now the flume will not carry the full amount of water that's that's in the contract from PG&E. It will not carry it. But the dual pipeline would, and it would be resiliency or redundancy there too, because if you had a problem with one pipe, you just use the other one. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that out so you had a little background information on it.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful.
Lisa.
Yeah, I'm sort of backing up a little bit, and this is the first part of the question is for Don, Eric, and David Boatwright, and then the second half would be for the legislators. So question is regarding the wastewater treatment plant that we are creating. We're going to be treating water to a tertiary level, which is different than what we've been doing. Is there any possibility within that to create a wetlands downstream of the water treatment plant that would be a benefit for recreation, as well as benefit for us dealing with stormwater and dealing with wastewater treatment water? Would there be any possibility of that? And if so, would that then would we be able to apply for funding for that chunk while we are constructing the new wastewater treatment plant?
Well, good morning. I will take a stab at that, Director Murphy, and Don, please jump in. I think there's potential, certainly. You hit the nail on the head in the first sense is that we have to produce water that would be, of high enough quality to be used for that application. And following the treatment plant project, we will have unrestricted reuse. So I'm kind of thinking about this. You could have a constructed wetland. Sometimes constructed wetlands are used as a treatment feature for wastewater. We wouldn't need that in this particular case, but there is land in the South County and the West County, if you will, that could be used for that application. It probably wouldn't be a groundwater replenishment type of project. It would more satisfy, I think, an environmental enhancement, maybe some recreation. Certainly we could look into that. We do need to be sensitive to the groundwater impacts. Even though it's unrestricted tertiary water, there still is groundwater monitoring requirements. But I do like the way you're kind of thinking outside the box and how we could connect those, recreation, environmental benefit, and help us, I don't want to use the word dispose, but lack of a better term, park some of our resource in a way that gives more benefit than maybe necessarily what it's currently been used for. I hope that answers your question. I mean, I don't have enough detail probably, but it's something we can certainly investigate more.
Yeah, no, that totally answers it. Thank you, Eric. And if that was the case, then the second part was to the legislators. Would that be something that would fall under when you were the stuff you were previously talking about?
Yeah, so it would, but I will say that we would probably, it would probably have to have some sort of component of a benefit to whether it's a groundwater supply or, constructing a wetland to sort of clean contaminants out of the water. It would be much harder depending on the site of the facility. I mean, if it's based in a in a rural setting or a disadvantaged community, then that would be a different piece. We probably have a better chance at being able to secure funding at that level. But I think there has to be a pretty strong environmental aspect to it as well, just sort of beyond creating a new habitat for wildlife. If that makes sense.
And would fire draft point?
That would be beneficial. Yes, exactly. Yep.
And if we were in the south or west part of the county, would for those of you guys who know about the county, would that be a useful draft point, or is that kind of too obscure?
Well, I mean, I think it could always be useful. Director Ringen did you want to respond?
Yeah, that's a definite yes, Director Murphy. There's been a couple fires down in the Jamestown area that came real close to being very devastating to homes and other structures down there. So firewater drafting points would be excellent. The other thing that I wanted to throw out is that the city of Sonora is very interested in stormwater control and so on. So there might be an opportunity to somehow partner up with them on some project like that.
Excellent, thank you. And from the legislative point of view, would that stormwater control be something that's a priority these days with climate, knowing that that's a function of climate change?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And if there's any way of keeping the water that you have within your community in your community, obviously when you start talking about rivers and environmental concerns, there water needs to flow, right? I mean, wildlife needs to have that aspect. But when it comes to stormwater runoff, if there's anything we can save and keep locally, whether that's for fire suppression or other habitat, then that's hugely beneficial. I think folks are always looking at green space. I think that's a little bit more of sort of on the green space spectrum that they're looking at more than anything else. But if in fact you could build something where you've got a wastewater or water runoff facility that would benefit not only just because the city's looking at something as well, but also benefit you all with wildfire suppression. That's hugely beneficial. So, and there's going to be, I think there's going to be different opportunities for that. I don't know, and this is one thing to also be aware of that. And Dennis had mentioned this, his team understands this quite well, is that a lot of the funding runs through the federal government and ultimately ends up at the state. The state has their own programs as well, because obviously they bring in their own monies on that side. But I think there's going to be an increased awareness and opportunity-wise for Western states, whether that's run through Department of Interior because Bureau of Reclamation has so much work that they do out in the 17 Western states or not. But we're going to see, I think opportunities in the future for this, but it has to have that multiple thought, right? How do we get rid of stormwater runoff? What do we do with it? Can we create a facility that also ultimately cleans it, is good for the habitat right in the area, and we can also use for fire suppression? That would be check, check, check. Awesome. So.
One last question on that, and I think this, I don't know if this goes to Eric, Don, or David, but does the stormwater have to go through our wastewater treatment plant, or could we do a treatment method on the stormwater that would be different, that would be a settling pond or something like that, that could be this wildlife habitat? I don't understand what needs to happen. Do you know?
Well, to understand our stormwater, though, TUD doesn't actually maintain and operate the stormwater system right now in the city of Sonora. So anything there would be a joint venture, TUD, city of Sonora. Very hard opportunities. Definitely, petroleum-based products, contaminants, should be removed from stormwater, such as roadway runoff and all that. Our community down through from, just below Phoenix Lake through Sonora, I was trying to think of any open space in through there for actually some sort of project. And, it's just, hardened rock and, canyon type. So very difficult. At this point, I wouldn't have any project I would suggest or recommend for anybody.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any other comment from board or staff here?
Yeah, I would like to open up a little bit on the solar side. Just recently, the news item on the television for covering the canals with solar panels and all that. Don, can you think of any opportunities that we might have to both generate power and, preserve evaporation or temperature control of any of our smaller reservoirs or anything?
Yeah, thank you, Director Boatwright. On the solar aspect, I was thinking of things much smaller in scale that Eric Johnson, our district engineer, threw out a thought just the other day on some sizable amount of solar needs that we would have down at Regional to offset the cost of our power consumption down there. So, Eric, what were you thinking about as far as the solar needs?
This is very half-baked, but we did have staff just take a very cursory look at potentially the area where we would be demolishing the old wastewater plant. And for those board members that attended the tour a few weeks back, you can visualize the amount of space available there. And it just on a high level looks like we could maybe offset $80,000, maybe $100,000 annually in power costs if we were to build out a solar array in that area. And it would fit in quite well with the site and would be used exclusively by TUD to operate our facility. So it wouldn't be necessarily net metered back to PG&E. And And so if there are opportunities, I guess the next question is, well, how much does it cost to develop, you know, a system of that size? And we're still working on that. My intention was to possibly present that to Steve, our finance director, and have him look at the terms and conditions we currently have with our USDA financing. And as we near the end of our project, if there's an opportunity and maybe our federal advocates could advocate on our behalf to increase the allocation if it made business sense and there was a good payback time. So that's kind of where we're going right now. We know there's some operating expenses that will be higher than previously. And if we can offset that with solar, that could be a great opportunity.
Do you have a sense of the cost of the investment?
I apologize, I'm unprepared for that.
That's okay.
This information was just yesterday, but we are working on that and we'll forward it to you once we do a little deeper dive on, you know, what industrial, I know what residential solar systems cost, but this is a different scale.
Well, and that's just a broader comment I'll make with all of the ideas that we've been talking through over the last 30 minutes. Ultimately, clearly they need to be fleshed out and the case needs to be made for them. But the ask of federal appropriators is, how much do you need? What is it going to cost us? So, you know, we'll just need to be really clear as we continue to prioritize these, that we know what we're asking for and whether we believe it's within the realm of reasonable given the types of appropriations we see for other projects.
Eric, how much do you know how much kilowatt that would be need to produce?
I have written on a note scratch paper, so don't hold me to this. This is, I'm looking at this and somewhere in the 350 kilowatt range. And, you know, I put a 5 kilowatt system on my house. So if that gives you any idea of scale, quite a bit larger.
Could I ask a side question here real quick? Would there be any, and again, we're just thinking out of the box here, right? So we're throwing up ideas as much as possible. In the previous couple of years or beyond, have you all had any issues where, and I'm guessing PG&E is the local provider of electricity throughout the district, is that correct? Okay, gotcha. So have you had rolling blackouts? Have you had concerns about, okay, so obviously you have backup generators and whatnot, so there could be an opportunity for supplemental, battery storage, but I don't know how that works in. And Eric, would just be a question, I guess, for you. Would that even make sense, or is your facility capable of, well, I'm sure it's capable of running itself on its own, but could there be benefits to adding a battery storage facility, right next to any solar project?
I think the short answer is we looked at that battery technology as it currently exists for our wastewater plant project. And we felt that the size of the battery and the load on the battery, we would still need to have generators. And that's what our designer recommended for reliability. And so once we realized that we would still need to have generators, it didn't make a whole lot of economic sense for us to have both. But when we were just talking about solar, it was more for actual day-to-day use. The battery, as the technology improves, and depending on Dawn can speak to this, the remoteness of some of our sites, it may or may not, if they're small enough, it may make sense as technology improves to go that way. What I would say is any solar system that we install, we will make it compliant and adaptable to be used for battery backup, because I do anticipate someday that is going to be the way we're going to want to go. We just haven't been able to step into that arena quite yet.
Speaking of infrastructure upgrades, as we're anticipating acquiring PG&E assets, and as we all know, PG&E is investor driven, and we are public entity. Would there be funding out there if we do acquire a couple of dams and a couple of reservoirs in the flume to make structural upgrades and have those be paid for with federal dollars?
So
If we acquire,
that's tricky. So if you, I will say this, I was actually, this is not name dropping, I promise. I just happened to be on a call earlier today with the folks at the Bureau of Reclamation, and they had mentioned on the call that they were focused on structural integrity of dams, and that's going to be a huge piece that they look at in the foreseeable future. They're addressing that right now. One thing that they were looking at is if there are opportunities where facilities needed to have upgrades, but then also could have, let's say, a pump storage aspect to them or something like that, or they could increase the size of the facility for water, water storage, things like that, then that's something that they were looking at. But they made it very clear it was all about structural integrity in the foreseeable future. So any opportunity to be able to do things, behind that, then that'd be great. But I think that's with the short amount of fund, we don't know what the funding's like every year. It's always going to be a little different. We're expecting an uptick this next year with this administration, and Democratic Congress is going to be wanting to address these issues. But I think it's going to be very much about ensuring that dams that might have aging issues or other problems are addressed first.
with that, part of our CVP plan is to be able to pump. We currently have pumps, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were put in, about, I don't know, was it in the 80s or something, as a mitigation for Jamestown Mine? And would that be something that they may look at, as those kinds of system improvements to help us through the NEPA process and compliance processes in order to be able to pump the CVP water into the lower end of our community? Would they buy us some pumps?
I think there might be an opportunity in there. We'd have to look into that. Yeah, because I'd just have to find out a little bit more about, what the needs were pump wise and otherwise, and see if there'd be additional benefits.
That would be terrific, because we are acquiring a lot of stuff that PG&E they were able to maintain, and our operations, our maintenance costs are just going to go up once we take on these systems. But conversely, we can always use FEMA money if something happens, but it would be better to make those structural upgrades ahead of time if we can with our federal partners.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Any other
Director Reagan has his hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
There's as a tag on to what Director Balin was just talking about, there's another component to that pump station that pulls the water out of New Maloney's. We have an agreement with the Tri-Dam group, and we have the ability, if we can figure out how to get the water from over there in the other canyon over into our ditch system near the top, we can actually get many acre feet that's been promised to us, but it's only when the dam is spilling. But that still doesn't mean that that's not going to work for us. We could run that water down the ditch. Well, first of all, there's an existing tunnel that the miners put in, and of course it's going to have to be renovated, and that's how we would get the water through over to the other side to our ditch system. And then we'd run the water down the ditch to the Columbia Divide, which is where the water from the pumps comes up to. Columbia Divide is a concrete container where the water in the ditch can go one or two ways, or both ways. So we run it down there, and then instead of running the water up from the pumps, we could run the water down the pipes, and there's a generator in that building that can make electricity. Now, if we had enough water going down that, we may want to upgrade that generator, but it's hooked into PG&E, and so we could make a few bucks on electricity, but also we'd have an ability to measure the amount of water that we're putting into New Maloney's from that generator. And that would give us an opportunity to possibly be able to work out some sort of agreement to be able to sell that water to downstream entities. Just a thought.
Yeah, and this is if you ever do have, I'll just throw this out there, an opportunity, and then a potential investor, whether that's a community downstream that's interested in the water that you supplemental water that you might be able to get at some point. It might be worth talking to them about upfront investments on things like that as well. We tend to find that if we throw the cast out a little wider than first thought, you might be able to get some buy-in from others. I guess
that's
sorry.
That's where we remind you guys we're not attorneys, so we're not, we
don't
provide legal counsel.
But part of that regional solution approach, right? How can something possibly we work on benefit those downstream and or budding communities, or national forests for that matter, right? Whoever that entity may be.
Over the years, Association for California Water Agencies, ACWA, they were in the early days, they were pretty much, we're going to get the water to everybody, even if it costs the environment, even if it, we're going to get the water to everybody. And over the years, they've totally changed to adopting what they call the co-equal goals, water for the environment and water for people, as they realized once they created wetlands out of their, treatment, settling ponds and stuff, that then the Audubon quit suing them and everybody's happy and the community's happy, and it continues to be a destination and a really cool place to live. And so over the years, ACWA has realized and actually touted the co-equal goals. And that includes, the salmon, the fisheries, and all the obligations on these great rivers. And so as California, it seems their population continues to grow and we've got unchecked demand on a finite resource. I know all of us in Tuolumne County, we're just really concerned about making sure the water stays here for our beneficial use so that we can continue being a destination. And I see a workshop on the horizon for this board to clarify or have a more robust discussion on integrated goals as the policy priorities come out for this current administration's. We can be ready and have those conversations with the whole community to see how we can partner, including our tribes, and tap in to an integrated approach to receiving the grant money. But we need to be ready, and it needs to be consistent with our policy principles as well before we can really be in alignment. So I'm pretty anxious or excited about seeing what the this current administration's priorities are and their policy priorities, so we can kind of tune up for that.
And I'll just say on the ACWA note, Sean and I are probably the lead folks within our firm engaging with Aqua. We work very closely with their folks in DC. Pre-pandemic, we were out at their big conferences twice a year. So I regularly participate in their Federal Affairs Committee meetings. So I am keeping track of what they're doing at that level. And then they've recently launched an infrastructure working group among the federal affairs folks. So they have folks that are talking about these issues. So I'm happy to continue to keep everyone informed about happenings, at least at the federal level, through Aqua.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing. There's a California legislator, or maybe, yeah, she's from California, in San Diego area, and she's proposing some kind of infrastructure bill, I believe, for certain projects. Typically, there's really not a lot for us in the mountain communities. It's all more or less storage and whatnot. Are you familiar with that? And gosh, I can't remember her name, but I do know she's from the San Diego area, and she's looking at low-hanging fruit that California can benefit. Is that ringing any bells with y'all?
There are a couple of different bills out there. Yeah, I think they're going to be part. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now. But yes, it's like more, I think, system improvements projects. But it's not a small bill, if I remember. It's like $500 million, which doesn't really sound like a lot of money anymore, I guess. But it's pretty broad. And I think last I had heard is that that it was going to be part of the water discussion. And I think it actually is going to, oh my gosh, I can't remember the bill number, but it's likely to be part of a water discussion when the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I think there's going to be multi-jurisdiction. I think Energy and Commerce is going to have Energy, and not to confuse you, that's just two different committees in Congress over in the House that are going to have oversight of the bill. But yeah, it's pretty aggressive. It's I think it's got some desal in it and water storage and a lot of different aspects to the bill, which are bills we've seen in the past, and I think will continue to be part of the conversation. What members of Congress, and just not to say this legislation won't make it across the finish line, but I think what happens is every year we see or every 2 years, whatever it may be, we see a reauthorization of the State Revolving Fund program through the EPA, and maybe some other additional programs that come through. And those State Revolving Fund programs are the ones that Dennis and Anthony were mentioning earlier. In many cases, where the EPA sets money aside for different states, depending on size of population and need and whatnot, and then the states relegate the money, divvy it up throughout their state priority list, right? So I think there's a lot of what members are trying to do is get away from that. They don't want the states necessarily to have the say, because they're hearing from their communities that, well, the SRF program doesn't really work for everybody. Our project's not the right size. It doesn't fit within the components there. Members just see the big ticket number, that it's multi-billion-dollar authorization every couple of years and then funding. And they think everything's, not every member, but they think things are getting taken care of. And what we see is members in drier communities, right? Downstream communities like San Diego and elsewhere, where they say, okay, we've got our own problems. We've got to come up with some solutions here. There needs to be more investment in desal, water storage. Conservation efforts is obviously a big piece as well, but how do we do groundwater replenishment? And I think what we're going to see is probably there's a good opportunity, I think, if they can get through the political hurdles of moving up a big water bill, is that it's something that needs to happen. What we learned from, and these aren't necessarily California problems, but lead and copper issues throughout the country. Everyone, I don't think half the communities in the United States, or at least half of us those of you outside of the Beltway, were aware that 50% of the communities in the United States had issues with lead, like too high lead levels, right? It wasn't until, what happened in Flint, Michigan, that I realized that Flint's not even the worst county in the state of Michigan. It was where my entire family lives. So I immediately went out and bought water systems, purified systems for them, because of things like that. So what we're seeing is, like, Well, all we're catching is that the high level, but really what members need to be focusing on are all these little things that can happen locally. And not every project is going to fit into some sort of, program. It just doesn't work that way. So we're seeing broad introductions. We've seen legislation that would benefit California and Western states from folks in Maine and Massachusetts. There's been a number of pieces of legislation introduced by members that live in upstate New York because of problems they've got there. So it's becoming, even Western water issues are becoming more prevalent as climate has changed in the East. I mean, just a few years ago, we had wildfire and drought concerns in Connecticut and New Jersey. And these, we don't know if it's going to be the new norm or not. And we're used to getting flushed with water out here on the East Coast. I mean, it's just, it rains nonstop. I wish we had the ability to pipe it out west. But the great thing about all of this is that members on the East Coast didn't necessarily understand issues on the West until they really caught the concerns of drought, which we've seen now. It's been a severe drought for a number of years, and then the wildfire issues that have not just been in California and Nevada. They've been all over. Washington State's rainforest caught on fire, 5 years ago. These are big issues that are raising the flag across the board. So we're likely to see broader legislation. Yes. And that was a very long answer. I apologize.
Madam President, are we looking to look at the order of priorities on this list of projects that was first put up, or are we going inclusive of all these projects that are currently on that list?
My first thought would be for, now that we kind of have a feel of a little bit of where this administration is going and their priorities are, as they formulate them, it'd probably be a good idea if the board regrouped and we looked at these, because they all kind of go together. They really do. It's really hard to rank, 1, 2, because they're all competing number ones, really. But really overlaying the disadvantaged community, the fire protection, if the board gets clear on what kind of integrated approach it wants, maybe that will help us prioritize these projects. Or maybe we don't have to prioritize them. Maybe we can add some other ones that'll help bridge some of these together on behalf of the whole community. It'd be stormwater's huge, and we, that even affects general plans also. So right now, I'm just thinking it would be good if the board regrouped and discussed these in some kind of strategic planning, and how we want to direct staff to work with our legislator advocates for the funding. Any other? David, do you have?
Director Ringen has his hand up for a comment.
Yeah, I thank you, Madam President.
Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, I think taking a look at the list would be a good idea. I'd almost like to, I'd like to throw out a suggestion almost that we take the list and kind of split it in two. I agree with you that all of the items are important and they're all things that we need to do, and they're interrelated in one aspect or another. But for the actual facilities, the building new plants and things like that, I'd almost like to hear from what the staff had to say as to what is most important on those, so that we we try hardest for the ones that they feel are the ones that we need to get built and completed and up and running as soon as possible. I think that would be helpful.
And Director Murphy also has her hand up for a comment too.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa, and staff chime in as well.
Yeah, just on thinking of the prioritizing, totally agree with what Ron just said about all the items are important and what does staff think needs to be prioritized. But then I would like to overlay on that also what projects currently would be likely to be kind of the all-stars for going for getting grant money into the district. So so that's more from the legislators is, you know, when we look at this list and if we can get what staff thinks are the to prioritize the timeline on things, and if we can get the legislators to let us know which things they think are most likely to get funding, and then we can overlay those things and see where they match up, I think would be a really helpful way to do it.
So Director Murphy, if I can just say, there's something that I've used with previous clients that I like to call a heat map. And so on one axis, it's where it falls within your priorities is TUD. Let's say that's the x-axis. And the y-axis is the how realistic it is that we will succeed in getting what we're looking for, whether it be funding or some other program in place. And then kind of identifying that sweet spot on the heat map of where we think we'll have success. I'm not sure it'll work exactly here, but I think once you've all identified those priorities in some way, we should take it back and look and see how realistic it is that we will get what you need, if that makes sense. So it's a graphical representation of priorities versus political reality, if you will. Oh, you're on mute.
I just saw Barb is appearing as speaker on that. Who was talking on that comment?
That was Jordan Smith. I think Zoom itself is having a little issue because Director Murphy, you were lit up as speaking, so, but it was Jordan Smith that was speaking at that time.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I think that sounds like a fabulous idea.
So how about the board and staff get together? And gosh, I sure wish we could get together at the district, but I guess that's not possible. And that we really look at all the multiple benefits of all these projects, and then as best we can, even if they're all number ones, you know, the funding probability is going to determine which ones get the funding, but at least we've identified lots of components of each of these projects so that our advocacies can see what we're interested in regarding money, so that they're not just thinking the project's just this one thing, that it has multiple components to it, multiple benefits. I think everybody froze. No, just me?
I can still hear you. I know. I'm watching everyone's summer freezing somewhere. I think that's, I mean, just real quick, this is Sean. I think that's a great idea. And I think that I think even having columns possibly in a separate sheet where we can say, okay, so what's the benefits? How quickly can we get this done, right? So is this a project that's currently already gone through the design and planning? That's important as well. And I don't want to weigh everything down on this, but just giving you some ideas to think about as you move through it. And then one are those additional community benefits, right? Those multi-jurisdictional benefits that we could find out. Can we get support from the county, from other local communities, the Native Affairs, or the Native tribes, things like that. You know, because community benefit ultimately plays a big role in decision-making in DC. So, thanks.
And this is Jordan, if I can just add to that, it seems like a robust exercise, but that information will be critical to us as we start to package it up to talk with policymakers, whether we're putting together fact sheets or other information to explain the story, explain the need, and the rationale. So I think putting that together on the front end will be very helpful to us as we look to put together an action plan.
That's great, because it's all about being able to tell our story, and the payoff is, let's say, Southern California really understanding that 65% of the state's water comes from the Sierra, and water's the economic driver of California. And once that connectivity happened, the bond support for projects in the Sierra went up. And like you said, that this is now really nationwide. Everybody gets the erratic instability of climate and how it's affecting all the sections and economic sections from the west to to upstate New York. So I think the more the board can sit down and look at, and staff, the multiple components and benefits of these projects, like wetlands associated with tertiary treated water, those kinds of things, then that will really help. And I want to hear from the board, are you guys okay with taking this list and of course adding a few more to it and going through the process of really identifying all the parts and pieces to these, all the benefits?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Did everybody go away?
No, everybody was kind of giving a thumbs
Give me some
up.
feedback here.
Everybody was doing thumbs up.
Well, then let's do that as the next step, and then we can call our legislators back in, and maybe they'll have more information on where the policy direction from this administration is going, so that we can really start getting in alignment. And I see us having to maybe do a little bit of retooling of our talent, our community talent pool.
Oh, Abby does have her hand up for a comment.
Okay.
Thank you. Madam President, just so we're clear on the direction to staff, is the meeting or the staff and board get together that you're referring to, if that's the full board, would you like us to schedule another workshop in the near future?
Yeah, board and staff. It would be so great if we could have it outside, together in a I don't know, masks or, anything other than this kind of tic-tac-toe board. I'm just saying, it's just so important with stuff like this to really, really have a kind of facilitated meeting and really flush out as integrated as we can get, and as triple bottom line as we can get on each one of these. Our advocacy is only as good as the story that we can tell them.
Director Kearns has his hand up.
Yeah, I know the county board of supervisors, they're going to go back to live meetings here, I think, was it next week? So I don't know how that may apply to us, whether we can do that or not. But anybody else see that article in the paper the other day?
No.
I was shaking my head a second ago about the outside, stuff flies, or you can't take notes, things are flying around and hard to hear. And, if we're doing it that way. So if we are okayed to be inside a big building space, that's one thing, but I would prefer Zoom over outside, just because I think that, on something like this, we need visuals, and for me, actually, Zoom, we've been teaching on Zoom for a year. So it's a very easy platform, and it's easy to do presentations and have visuals and stuff like that. It is handy if you have the ability to run 2 computers at the same time. It's handy to be able to do that, just to be able to have different things on different screens. But so I would say, please, let's not have an important meeting like this outside where things are flying around, and also it's not as private.
What about a, one of the warehouses where there's ventilation, but it's and it's a larger space than our boardroom? Would that be possible?
President Balin, so just referring to Director Kern's comments, the Board of Supervisors have actually been holding their meetings just with the board and staff in their board chambers for, I believe the whole time, but at least for the last number of months. I think you saw in our joint meeting with them a couple of months ago that the Board of Supervisors were in the chambers and they were wearing masks. Depending on the number of attendees, we could accommodate less than 10 people in the boardroom, socially distanced, and in a COVID-friendly way, if with wearing masks and things, and then just having everyone do a self-screening. That's what we do with our employees who are working in the office. So we're happy to do that. I just wanted to also be clear on the workshop setting, as obviously if there's the majority of the board, that would be a public meeting that we would want to record and present on our website.
Yeah, I'm reading here on mymotherlode.com. Their informal plan is to reopen the meetings to the public the first week of May. Could come sooner if the county enters the yellow tier. So it may very well be tied to that yellow tier issue.
Yeah. Just to tag on, this is Steve Sheffield, your finance director, but historically, these public board meetings, and I know there's a new bill that's been proposed in California that requires our meetings to be available to the public via Zoom, via Granicus, whatever. But historically, TUD has always recorded its meetings, whether we have the public there or not. So, you know, if we wanted to do to an off-site type meeting, we'd obviously have to notice it to the public, provide for public interaction, and I think the board need to address that it would not be a recorded meeting. So.
Well, thank you, Steve. Let me ask my fellow board members, and I'll just start with myself. I mean, it's partly because I've, been vaccinated and all that, because I want to see my grandchildren. So how many here would be okay with, like Abby said, 10 folks in a workshop setting, board and staff, and maybe one of us can facilitate that, I don't know, but who would be opposed to that? Because I think we would be very productive if we could meet together in the boardroom.
You just asked it in the positive and the negative.
Yes, I know I did. So however you want to answer is fine.
I'm in favor of meeting like you just proposed.
Was that you, Jeff?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm very comfortable with online and how that functions. It gives me more ability to take notes and really understand things, I think, more than it in person. And again, not everybody does that, but that's my position.
David, how do you feel about? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say I could go either way.
Yeah, myself, I'm getting pretty close. Got second shot coming up and all that. Abby, how is the knowledge of availability to the district staff for vaccinating and all that? Is there any update?
Yes, the staff has been, or the county has opened up vaccinations to TUD staff since May, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong month here, since March 4th. And so that has given the opportunity from that first date for staff to have received their second vaccination. So we continue to put out information, education on vaccination, and then all of our normal COVID-19 education pieces. Everyone's been through mandatory COVID-19 training on the effects of COVID-19, the spread of COVID-19, the prevention of COVID-19, including and up to vaccination, and regular reminders on how to make an appointment to get vaccinated.
Do we have a current estimate on how many people chose to vaccinate versus how many people chose not to? Like percentage of staff?
I do not have an estimate.
Okay, so in the interest of time right now, and we're going on 2 hours, how about that we, I can work with Abby and the rest of staff. Some of us can attend live, and then some of us can Zoom in, and we can have a board workshop. And if some of us Zoom in, then maybe we have room to have a facilitator come in and help us with these priority projects and really deliver on all aspects of them. And then we can regroup with our legislative advocacy folks and see where we go. Does that sound all right?
I would strongly recommend against trying to do both things. So choose one or the other. Trying to do both things puts the people, it takes away from the in-person experience. If you're trying to mix and mingle around and look at things, it's something that gets used in classrooms sometimes. It's really, really difficult, and it makes the in-person experience less, and it makes the Zoom experience less. So I would say pick one or the other, but don't try to do a hybrid. It's really hard and difficult to do that. And we're not that good at Zoom with TUD. So I would say pick one or the other.
I agree, Lisa. I've been on both sides of that, and I agree. I think we either have to be one way or the other.
Well, what does that mean? Does that mean we vote then? On we either do a Zoom or we do in person? At least I hear that you don't want to do an in-person.
I find I am very functional on Zoom. I understand that that's not the same for everybody, but that platform works quite well for me. And so that would be my preference. However, if we choose to have an in-person meeting, I would attend, as long as we're doing it in a responsible manner and in accordance with what the county is allowing us to do, and with the ventilation system in the building and stuff that we're in line with safety precautions.
Well said. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up. I mean, I think that I'm for trying a safety compliance in person if we're all sort of comfortable, and I'm okay doing Zoom too, but we'll figure that out just as long as we can work on these priorities, and however it happens, I'm fine. So unless we don't have anything more to say, I would definitely like to thank our guests for being here. We really appreciate being able to do a Q&A with you guys. And thank you so much for being the eyes and ears out there in the legislative world. Thank you.
We do have Albiani does have a comment. Looks like he wants to say something real quick.
Thanks. There was only one thing I was going to suggest, is that once we get our priorities together and we get that nailed down, that I think there is value in us getting either a board meeting So we could, we could post it, or maybe a subcommittee of the board, 2 of you, to meet with our legislative folks and meaning, Frank Bigelow, Senator Borges, some of the key legislative staff that are running the committees, just to, again, build that relationship, let them know the story. And then, as COVID clears out, which again is months out, maybe we could even, get some of them up to the district. So I don't want to, it's a little more difficult under COVID, but it's also easier because we can just pull some together video wise. So if that works for you all, in the near future, meaning next month or so, I'd like to encourage that among those members to start that dialogue.
Thank you.
Yeah, a question, and maybe it should have came out earlier. Mr. Johnson, do we have any of the listed projects currently engineered and ready for shovel in the ground, or do we still have some work to do that way?
I wish we could say that they were, ready to go. I could pull them right off the shelf, Director Boatwright, but we have been successful in the past at like a preliminary conceptual engineering level of demonstrating need, demonstrating, co-equal goals, demonstrating that there's a disadvantaged community and that there's technical merit to the projects, and then work as quickly as possible once we get indication that there'll be a funding agreement or that it's getting a favorable consideration. So the direct answer is no, we're not exactly 100% ready, but staff will prioritize per what the board's direction. And if historically, if money's available, we'll make it happen. We'll get it ready. And obviously, something like the Sonora Regional Wastewater Plant, a $25 million project, it's not that simple, but a lot of the other projects that we have received grant funding on, like $1 million here or there, they can, staff can really dig in and in a matter of months be ready for a lot of those. If they don't require land acquisition, that's one of the caveats, and then environmental. But some of the infrastructure projects can be ready quite quickly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else?
Just want to thank you for the opportunity. We've got lots of work ahead and we're looking forward to it.
Yes. I'm looking forward to it too. And I think that this will be a really revealing exercise in terms of getting TUD geared up to support grant opportunities. All right. Well, with that, then we'll go ahead and close off the meeting. Appreciate everyone's time, and we'll schedule a workshop. Thank you.
Everyone have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Stay safe.
Okay, with no further information, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.